Hello, and thanks for checking out this webinar on essay writing for the UK fellowships for the internal application process. We're going to go through a few slides here that are really geared for those of you that are looking at, within the next couple of weeks, putting together and submitting your internal application for the Rhodes and for the Marshall scholarships. And in that application, the internal application, there are two short answer questions. One's 350 words, one's 800 words. And what this presentation is going to do today is help you think through how to put forward the best response. So some of that's going to be around kind of like unpacking the questions, talking about the audience, and then some of the kind of features and tips and guidance that we have will speak more directly to writing processes. But anyway, to both effects, we're just hoping that offering you this information allows you to feel empowered to put forward the best application you possibly can for internal endorsement. So before we kind of jump into the prompts and the essays and how to respond to those, I want to talk a little bit about the context. So we write for an audience, and it is important for you to understand who those audience members are because it can give you direction in how you choose to respond to certain prompts or frame your argument, so on and so forth. So we really are trying to look at the internal stage for applicants that are most prepared to be competitive for the Rhodes and the Marshall Scholarship. So on the one hand, there's the audience of like, after you get nomination, are you going to have the narrative and are you going to have the credentials and experiences and merit to move forward and to kind of like compete in the final stages for the Rhodes and the Marshall in terms of designing an application and putting all the work in and submitting that in October. So what we're trying to do is find that kind of raw material that allows us to identify potential competitive candidates so that then the Office of Fellowships with your advisor can work with you extensively throughout the summer to put forward the most kind of like competitive application possible. So who then is on the internal endorsement committee? Well, we want individuals that are really familiar with what those features, characteristics, and qualities that the two scholarships, grantors are looking for. So we turn to past Georgetown University alumni that have received these scholarships in the past. And we ask those who maybe they've been out between 5 and 10 years, they've gone through our process here at Georgetown before, they've also gone on to their fellowship, so they've gone to the UK, they've had that experience, they've participated as a Marshall scholar, as a Rhodes scholar, so that they have that kind of like connectivity to knowing kind of like who is optimal for selection. But then they also have a lot of institutional knowledge when it comes to Georgetown, so they're familiar with our centers, some of our faculty, they're familiar with our majors and our schools. So they're going to have that background knowledge that helps them both situate their understanding of the Georgetown candidate, but also with an understanding of what the Rhodes and the Marshall are looking for, right? And it's worth saying that neither of the two fellowship advisors on the Rhodes and the Marshall in the Office of Fellowships, which is Laura Peril and myself, Lauren Tuckley, neither one of us sit on the selection committee. So we welcome you at any point in time, so long as it's not the day before the deadline, for you to send us drafts of your essays so that you can get feedback from us on, like, are you hitting the right features? Are you able to, are you addressing this prompt in the right way? We're more than happy to give you feedback on that. Since we're not sitting and making the final decisions on competitiveness, we can actually kind of be your ally in this respect and help you design the most competitive application you can possibly put forward. So we welcome you to do that. And again, no staff in the Office of Fellowships are sitting on the selection committee and making those final decisions. Before I get into the two prompts themselves, I want to talk a little bit about process. So before we start brainstorming ways to address those two prompts, it's really important for me to convey to you the idea that writing is almost like a final stage in the design of either an essay or a short answer or even an academic paper, so on and so forth. Writing is a reflection of a lot of thinking and prior research that has gone on. So one of the biggest challenges that we work with students on is sitting down and, the student's like, I don't know what to write about, or I don't have any ideas, or I've hit a roadblock, or, I'm got writer's block and I don't know what to say next, or it's just not coming, like the words and I'm not in the flow, right? And a lot of times that can be reflective of not having enough to say. And so one of the things that you'll want to do when thinking about responding to the short answer questions that we're going to talk about here in a second, or when you're actually looking at, any sort of substantive piece of writing, doing a lot of background preparation first. And so doing some pre-writing, and pre-writing can be anything from thinking, reflecting, journaling, researching, Googling, designing, putting together, if you're visual, putting together kind of like a mind map of like where you want to go and what you want to say, so that when you come and sit down, you are ready to write, right? I don't want you to get behind the, wheel of a car until you've had your driver's ed. I don't think you should be writing until you've thought about all of the ways in which you're going to enact the writing process. And what I mean by enact the writing process is like where you feel empowered, that you know what you want to say. And so now when it's time to write, that's the time to say it. And then after you've kind of gotten that out, then you go into a drafting process where you edit and you revise and you get feedback. And you do that until you find a polished product that you think is the best product that you can offer. Then you're ready to submit. So just want to give you a little bit of encouragement to not jump into the writing straight away, to actually sit back and think about what you want to say, draft that out, outline that out, think about, all the possible ranges of responses that you could offer, reflect, and then when you know your tactic, then you execute. So let's get to the first essay prompt in the internal application itself. The essay prompt number 1 asks in about 350 words max, what is the issue to which you intend to apply your expertise, and in what capacity do you seek to make an impact? There are 2 really important features of this prompt that we'd like you to pay attention to. The first is the issue. If you are for the first time hearing this kind of terminology around issue, like your fellowship application, your design, your pitch, it takes up an issue. It takes up a problem space, and it seeks to make a difference in a defined specific area. Then, if this is new to you and you haven't really thought about your issue as it's related to your problem space, I want to encourage you to go back to Georgetown University Office of Fellowship's website, to go to the Information Sessions tab, and then to pull up the Issues versus Problems tutorial webinar that's available to you, so that you can understand what we're talking about when we say what is the issue to which you intend to apply your expertise. Because this sort of has a duality here. We're looking for, one, do you have a specific issue in mind that is motivating your movement towards getting graduate degree or graduate skills to skill up so you can take that return and then apply it to the problem space or the issue that you've defined. So we want to see the motivating issue, but we're also interested in the idea that you have brought some prior knowledge or that you have expertise around the shape of that issue. So we expect that the first prompt is going to be rather declarative in persuading me that there is a problem, that there is a singular issue that you can define, that is giving kind of a sense of or an orientation to the design of your candidacy, to which it will be highly connected to your degree program. And then the second part of this prompt is that area around impact, that what capacity do you seek to make an impact? So we want to know what the problem is, then we want to forecast. You don't have to tell us about the degree programs and all that kind of stuff here. We want to see that you understand the landscape of possible intervention spaces that you would seek to interject or insert yourself into after you've completed your degree programs. So in the one hand, it's asking about a vision. Where do you see yourself going, where you can make a big difference after having had the degree program opportunities in the UK? And so on the one hand, it's asking, is there alignment there between expertise and then impact? And then is there also the knowledge of the landscape for possible places where you can make the greatest impact in your future professional trajectory? So here, we want you to focus in on being specific with the issue and persuasive. Tell me why this matters and why I should care. And then at the same time, Sell me on this idea that after the graduate education that you're having, you would seek to align yourself with XYZ organization because they do this thing that's so connected to the expertise and experiences that you are currently developing. We have a little hint here to be specific and to consider cutting edge people or organizations who might serve as models for work or for this work. We like that because we don't want to just sort of say, you know, I'm interested in diplomacy, so I'm going to go do State Department. That is like amorphous. It's not specific. We don't get the sort of features of how you're going to have a career that's being influenced by your opportunity to have been a Rhodes or a Marshall Scholar. So we're saying when you're thinking about impact, you might consider drawing on others in your field or the field that you aspire to join as a proxy or an example of the type of career that you similarly aspire to. The second essay prompt asks for a little bit more of a reflection, and a reflection as it's related to past experiences that you have had that prepare you for this work, and then how it has informed and deepened that perspective that you're bringing. So essentially, we would like to know what might be the 1 or 2 experiences that you have had, often outside of the classroom. Often these are overlapping with sort of leadership type experiences, although not exclusively. Like, where was there a moment where you said, yeah, that is actually what led me to this place where this is my interest and my specialty? Like, how did you get to that moment? Where is that aha moment in your past trajectory? And then to tell us how that unfolded. Was it, you know, through great strife that something happened and it was clarifying for you, and then you decided, you know, this was going to be the thing that you were going to center your senior thesis on because it stemmed from some, you know, a summer research you did last year, and it all came together when you were out doing field research. Like, tell that story, right? One of the missteps that we see here is that you want to tell us too much. Oftentimes students will respond to this and they'll be giving us 4 or 5 different elemental experiences that in aggregate have brought them to a moment where they had the kind of clarity for this is where, how, and the way in which they want to move forward. And doing that doesn't provide us with near enough detail about how you're thinking and how you are wrestling with the issue, or how that came to be present in your most current experience, how it's informing your ambition and your trajectory. If you're telling us the narrative resume, all we're getting is sort of the names of places you've worked, people you worked with, and how that played out. You will be including your resume with your internal application materials. So we will have that information about the cool, you know, internships you've had or summer work experiences that, you know, you've had along the way. What we want to know is, when did this and how did this become the thing that you are committed to? And tell us about that story. That's what we want to hear. Here we're using the terminology personal statement. There's some tips here, but I think that they're also very applicable to the short answer essays for the internal nomination. I'm going to hit you with it again. The response to those short answer questions, or the personal statement, or anytime you're writing in this particular fellowship genre, we don't want a narrative version of your resume at all. Again, it doesn't show us how you've been thinking. It shows us what you've been doing, and that's important, but that's the job of your resume, not the job of your statement or your response to the short answer questions. Don't worry about like having this sound beautiful or being poetic. We would rather you be clear and help us understand those issues, that issue that you care deeply about, or help us understand how that issue became so present in terms of your motivation for like how you've been, you know, challenged to think about your conceptual issue, or how you've been committed to that. We want to hear about those things. And absolutely, we would prefer something that's extremely clear and maybe borders on a touch boring, but not overly trying to do more with the words than, I mean, this is not poetry, right? We don't want to have an interpretive, you know, toolkit to be able to understand what you're telling us. One of the things you should be aware of, internal nomination, we're looking for the material, the substance. that would allow for you to put together a competitive candidacy. We're not asking for competitive candidates to walk and present themselves, in the internal application. There's a lot of thinking and design and development that goes on after endorsement. So we just want to make sure that, like, don't overly invest in the fluidity of how the words sound for the sake of selecting words and sentences that are short and crisp and clearly communicate your intent and your past experience and your issue area. Another tip here about what a statement is not, it's not a thought piece. So, this is not like your moment to wax poetically as though it were an op-ed in the New York Times and about like how you're going to, solve the world's problems and that this is the major root cause of all these things. This is more about clearly defining an issue and then talking about how you got to that place where you care very deeply about it. A personal statement is not a series of general statements and claims that could have been written by any other applicant, so specificity surely matters. We want this to derive from you. We want, after having read it, no one else to have been able to say those exact same things but you. A personal statement is also not a rehash of material found elsewhere in your application. So if you're zeroing in, on this response number 1 about like the issue, and you're in there and you're telling us like the magnitude of the problem and how that came to be, you don't want to repeat that exact same information in the second essay. So be very careful about redundancy across the 2 statements themselves. Again, one of the most important things here is specificity, being as specific as possible. We almost, it's almost like you can't be too specific. You can be too specific if you're like, here's my 14-step plan from like graduating Georgetown to becoming Secretary of State. I mean, that's a little much. It's also a little bit hubristic. But I think that in general, default towards being specific and really help us understand that trajectory. So in the response to question number 1, we ask about your issue and about impact. And that impact, I think, has this sort of implicit suggestion of trajectory, like where are you going to be in the future and how are you going to be making an impact? So thinking about, extending out several years, where are you going to be right after the fellowship? And what kind of, path does that set you on in terms of your issue area and how that intersects with your professional goals? Narrative is really important, so being able to speak to us and to tell us stories. And I'm not saying this has to be story time like Kumbaya, like, it was a dark and stormy night. I'm not talking about that. When we say narrative, we're talking about sort of like communicating directly and candidly and using past experiences and stories to exemplify some of the things that you claim to be true to you. So we want to hear about how that summer internship, when all of the data that you had been working on pointed in a different direction, and you had this aha moment, and you went to talk to your mentor, and you had this amazing conversation about, like the social determinants of health, that you hadn't thought about this, certain element as it's related to public health. And that's where, it's taken you in this new direction. We want to hear about the people and the places that have informed that. So how it's situated within your past experiences. We don't want to just hear you say, I learned that, kind of like the way in which a city is designed has an impact and a bearing on social determinants of health. I found this out while researching, that's telling us. I want you to sit back and to say more and offer more details and to tell the story of that if you have the space in that second essay. And that's why you don't have space to do 5 of those different anecdotes. We want 1 or 2 different anecdotes. We want you to exemplify as opposed to telling us. And that's what we mean by using and approaching it as a narrative exercise. And then statements such as these are authentic, reflective, specific, mature, and strategic. I think it's hard to, take all of these sort of 5 concepts and then evaluate each of the essays and have each of these hit in equal amounts and across every single essay. But in general, you know, we want, sometimes some of the best stories are stories of failure. Like we want to hear the authentic moment that has given shape to the causes that you care very deeply about. And sometimes that's not always pretty. And we would rather hear that story of struggle and maybe not being so sure, but coming to a point of clarity and how that journey took place. We would rather hear that than to hear something where everything, you know, was, you know, just fell into place from the day you took your first course at Georgetown. You're just always going to do that. I mean, we don't want you to, like, you know, be inauthentic in overly embellishing the story, right? But we do want to just sort of hear about your personal take on this. Why do you care? We want to know why you care. Why do you care about this thing? How did that come to be? Why does it bother you so much? Why are you trying to develop your entire professional career on this? Those are huge things that we want to know about. So being authentic and reflective is really important. Being specific allows us to really understand your kind of vantage point. You know, I think the tone, you can claim a little bit, you know, like you can have some assurity in your case, this is your story. And then strategic, you want to make sure that, like, if you're talking about impact and where you want to go in the future, that you're strategic in how you're thinking about what those potential outcomes could look like, and pick those opportunities that most align with the narrative pitch that you're designing. Some writing tips. Expect to write many drafts. I think the first draft is always what we call the shitty first draft. Just get it out on paper after you've done your thinking. After you've done your thinking and you're designing and you're pre-writing and you have a ton of ideas and you're brimming to write. You're brimming with ideas and you can't wait to write. Then you're ready to begin the drafting process. And that first draft is going to be super ugly. Just get it out. Don't think too hard about it. The modifications and the finalization and the polish comes in the drafts. Show, don't tell. Again, going back to the prior point around, don't just give us a list, give us more information about how that experience played out. Again, clarity is more important than style. Avoid jargon, especially if you're in a field that's highly specific. You know, those of you in the sciences may have to really think about your audience not being necessarily scientists or having the specialized technical nomenclature that you might have, having maybe someone that you know who is not in your field of study read this and sort of, can you circle some words in this that you think are jargony or that you didn't understand? Those are always really good practices. Read your essay aloud. I can't tell you how many times when you read that essay aloud, you're going to pick up on either grammatical mistakes or ways that you phrase things that might sound a little bit kind of clunky or awkward. A lot of that. And then also, is it true to your voice when you read that out loud? Did that sound like you were talking, or did that sound like, you know, kind of a manufactured self? So reading your essay aloud can help with both clarity and communicative, like how well you executed the communicative element of the, you know, piece itself. It can also be a test for, you know, is my voice present and authentic in this space? I mean, always be authentic and honest and keep your audience in mind. And then I want to remind you guys that we have a couple of weeks now before the internal deadline, to which we will need all of your materials, your application, your resume, so on and so forth, your 3 letters of recommendation, and for those of you applying for the Rhodes, the additional 5 pre-recommendation forms that would be completed by recommenders that will recommend you for the Rhodes if you get endorsement. You'll want to send those materials and have your letters of recommendation sent to guffa@georgetown.edu. But in the meantime, your fellowship advisor can help you. We can give you feedback on the writing. You can ask us specific questions that relate to the work that you're going to need to do in relation to those prompts as it's situated within your particular case. So a lot of things that I've talked about here in this webinar might have spoke to more generalities. If you hit us up with a specific question, we're going to give you much better and more precise, tailored feedback depending upon what your particular circumstances are. So we would encourage you to do both, reach out with questions and send us your drafts when you're ready for some feedback on that. Again, we don't sit on the committee, so we're happy to offer you that. Our one caveat is that you don't want to wait a day or two before the deadline, because we're not going to have time to give your essays feedback if you don't give us enough time to manage the volume of requests that may come in kind of in the latter stages of the application process. And with that, you can reach us at any time to ask questions, about this webinar, about the Rhodes or the Marshall, or with your request to get feedback on the written portion by emailing GUFA, that's GUFA, @georgetown.edu. Thanks for listening. Have a good one. Bye.